So thanks everybody for coming out to the library, and thanks for folks on Zoom as well. My name is Cynthia Blankenship, and I'm the president of the Geologists of Jackson Hole, and I help run the speakers committee. And for those of you here at the library, I hope you enjoyed the appetizers and drinks and social time. So please remember to silence your phones or turn them off, please. And for those folks on Zoom, please direct any questions for our speaker to me, Cynthia Blankenship, via the chat feature, and I'll read them aloud at the end of the talk for both the library and Zoom audiences. As a reminder, GGH has a long-standing partnership with the Teton County Library and the Library Foundation and Friends. We're very grateful for the library to let us use this fabulous auditorium, despite the feedback. So please remember the library and the foundation in your giving plans. We're also part of the Science and Nature Tuesday evening programs, and you can get more information on them from our free newsletter. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter and would like to, there's some GGH business cards on the table over here, and there's even a QR code you can scan to get to our website. So again, please consider joining Geologists of Jackson Hole as a member. Dues start at $20 a year for individual dues, and you get to come to our barbecue for free, which alone is worth $20, and you get to go on field trips as well. So please consider that. I have a couple important announcements. The first one is that our next lecture, because of is going to be given by Naomi Levin, who is a professor at the University of Michigan and who co-teaches their Davis Field Camp right down here in Hoback. And she's going to come talk to us about human evolution and geology. However, she's going back to Michigan, and so we had to move up her talk from July to the end of June. So her talk is going to be June 24th, which is also a Tuesday, but it's the last Tuesday in June, okay? And the other announcement is, and this is in our calendar online, but on June 7th, there will be a special event hosted by the Forest Service to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Grovont landslide. And it's going to be held at the Grovont Geologic Overlook. It was kind of, oh no, I didn't put it in there. Anyway, if you want more so it's June 7th, so just a few days from now. They're going to serve free lunch if you RSVP like tonight. But if you want to come even at the last minute, all you have to do is bring your own lunch. And on their website and on their flyer, it says the deadline to RSVP is the May 26th, which of course has already passed. I got them to agree to extend the deadline to the 4th, which is tomorrow. So it should be great. There's going to be a morning from 10 to noon of trail service work in the area and signage work. Then from noon to 2:30 is going to be a series of lunch and a series of presentations. One of the presentations is going to be on the geology of the slide, and it's going to be given by the Wyoming State Geologic Survey expert in landslides, James Mosh. And James has given us 2 talks here, including one where he hiked the entire length of the Grand Canyon solo. Outstanding speaker, should be wonderful. And then there'll be some information on the history of the slide in the area. Okay, so without moving right along now, next I'd like to introduce our speaker, Lauren Heerschap, and I apologize publicly because we spelled her name wrong on the newsletter. There is both an S and a C on Heerschap. So Lauren grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico, which is probably a big reason why she became a geologist and a climber. Lauren studied geology and theology at Wheaton College and first used a Brunton compass during her 8-week geology field camp in the Black Hills. She went on to study tectonic geomorphology in Taiwan, also with a Brunton in hand, for her master's degree at the University of Colorado Boulder. After graduating, Lauren worked with the Colorado Geological Survey, then for a small oil and gas firm in Durango, Colorado. She then taught geology, geographic information systems, GIS, and field methods at Fort Lewis College for almost a decade, during which the idea for a new model of Brunton compass came about. That invention process brought Lauren and her husband David increasingly close to Brunton's majority owner and CEO of Brunton. Whoops, wait a minute. Sorry. This process brought Lauren and her husband David increasingly close to Brunton's leadership, which eventually led to the opportunity to buy the company in 2021. Lauren is now the majority owner and CEO of Brunton, making the company a female-owned, geologist-led family business for the first time in its 130-year history. So over to you, Lauren.
All right, thank you. Thanks for that great intro. I'll also just test the audio, and if it starts to squeak or if you can't hear me, let me know. So far, so good? I think so. All right. How many of you guys have used a Brunton before? A geological Brunton? Okay, that helps. About half of us. Great. I'll keep that in mind as we proceed. Now, let's see if this will let me progress my slides. It's not doing anything. Okay, there we go. Just have to click it a while. All right, so I will try to keep this presentation to about an hour. I'll keep an eye on the clock. I tend to start to get going with some of these topics, so I'll try to breeze through some things, and then we can spend more time on Wyoming-focused things towards the end. But I do like to tell the story of Brunton. It's a company with a long history, 130 years, and it's a pretty convoluted history too. It's actually really complicated. But let's start from the very beginning. Step back to the late 1800s, mine geology, any kind of land surveying related to mine, exploration, starting here. Okay, I think we're back to recording again. The computer just talked to me. The invention you see in front of us is called a pocket transit because it's basically like a theodolite that you can fit in your pocket. It can take horizontal bearings, so compass measurements from 0 to 360, and it can also take vertical angle measurements. And so hence it's called technically it's both a theodolite and a transit. But for the first time, it became something that is portable and can be precise, but still tiny enough to fit in your pocket. So you don't need 3 mules to carry all of your equipment, and you can set it up very easily on a tripod or just set it in your hand because it has bubble levels. So it's actually a really ingenious device. And as I said, he had several iterations from 1894 until his death, actually, of improving, just small improvements to the pocket transit. Brunton also got involved in World War I. As a Canadian, he wasn't allowed to fight for the US military, but he still worked with the US military on developing a military version of the pocket transit, as well as its illumination, which at that time was with radium, unfortunately. He continued after the war to work on both mining and military work. He was active in Colorado. He actually gave back a lot to Colorado School of Mines. And this is one of his final patents. But he passed away in 1927. But he's actually buried in Denver. I still haven't visited his grave. One of these days. But Brunton himself, again, quite a character. He his name has held true to the brand, which is one that's well known in geology circles. But I'll circle back to some of that military and some of the other sides of Brunton as well. I think a lot of geologists don't realize that there's more to Brunton than just the geology side. I'll be brief about Ainsworth, but it's also really, it's worth mentioning Ainsworth because he was the one who actually made the pocket transits. Ainsworth was a kind of a watchmaker by trade. He set himself up in Central City in Colorado with a watchmaking and a jewelry shop. But because he was such a skilled machinist, working with precise little parts, and had gotten to know Brunton, he became the one that Brunton approached with his patent and said, hey, can you make this? And so he, alongside Brunton, any Brunton, and some of you in here might have one that was made by Ainsworth in Denver, but from 1894 until 1972, all Bruntons, geological Bruntons, were made in Denver, and they say Ainsworth on them. And so some of these are those like brass or silvery models. And they had for the rest of Brunton's life and his life, they worked together on these various models until stuff was moved up to Wyoming. So in the 60s and 70s, if you've never been to Riverton before, how do I say this? It's a little past its prime. That's largely because of the mining and oil and gas almost heritage. Like it's still going on, but I'll just leave it at that. Anyway, if you step back into the late 60s, early 70s, it was a hub for uranium mining in the Gas Hills, oil and gas throughout the Wind River Basin and beyond, in the Bighorn Basin. And so a group headed up by a fellow named Jack Larson had, with geology backgrounds, they had used Bruntons for a long time and realized that the Ainsworth company at that time was it was ailing. It wasn't thriving down in Denver. And they saw this Brunton compass sort of threatened in a way and decided, and they also saw it as a business opportunity. And so they bought the assets and inventory of Ainsworth, the Brunton side of Ainsworth, and moved everything up to Riverton, Wyoming. And the first Brunton building still exists. I drive by it almost every day. It's very humble. That was the U.S. Energy building that Brunton, I think they started to set up some sheds as they outgrew this building, and everyone had to just like make these precision instruments in these little sheds by this very humble building in Riverton. And I'm also trying to find a nice way of saying this, but one of the reasons that we're told by some of the original folks in Riverton is that they also moved it up to Riverton because there was an ample supply of bored housewives of oil and gas and mining husbands who could use a part-time job or a full-time job assembling things and kind of setting the stage for additional industry in Riverton. So still to this day, Brunton is primarily female. For whatever reason, obviously it's female-led now, but we're still about 60 to 70% female, which I think is great. Keeping Brunton in Wyoming and in Riverton has really been a community effort. It was a community effort to get it there with the funds of the U.S. Energy Corp. But it's also been a community effort to keep it from splitting off or getting absorbed or moving to China. Ownership hasn't stayed, and I'll get to that part of the story, but manufacturing has been in Riverton since 1972, and hence Wyoming. There's our new building. That was built in 2006, still well before my involvement with the company. And I think I have the map next. Nope, okay, I'll get there. Anyway, I'll pause and say, if this group or as an entity or individuals, if you're ever through Riverton and want to tour Brunton, we love giving tours, especially those that are prearranged, not just knocking on the door. We still get that quite a bit. Sometimes 2 hours later, I'm like, wow, where did those 2 hours go? But it's still, we love giving tours. And you can buy things there too. This is on the back of the catalog that's over here on the table, and you're welcome to take these on your way out tonight. But we tried to put Brunton's history on a timeline, and it was just too long a timeline. So I arranged it around a compass so that it could be cute and thematic. And I know it's too small to read, but this is an attempt to show, like on the inside of the dial, you have the location of manufacturing in Denver, 1894 to 72, and then in Wyoming. And then the next circle out is ownership. And so the Ainsworth, really truly, they did own the brand. And so it's Ainsworth until 72. Then it's this Brunton group. That's the US Energy Corps with Jack Larson. And I don't have a slide for this, so it's worth pausing here. In 1996, Silva of the Silva compasses of Sweden bought Brunton. And that was a major shift for Brunton. Silva was interested in Brunton so they could distribute their nautical compasses in North America. And it began this weird merging of a lot of intellectual property that we're still wading through right now. But it began 25 years of Scandinavian ownership of Brunton. Silva also almost pulled the manufacture of the plastic recreational compasses entirely to China. I think a few models were still made in Riverton. The geological transits have always been made in Riverton since 72. But Silva moved a lot to China. Then Silva sold Brunton to Fiskars of Finland, and then Fiskars sold Brunton to Phoenix, back to Sweden. And that sets the stage for where Dave and I, my husband and I, kind of entered the scene. We started working, and I'll get to that story. We started kind of working with Brunton in about 2014. And so I couldn't fit our name up here, but new is when we took over. So it's really been, and this is really only part of the story, an attempt to organize this long history of a 130-year-old brand. We are almost the world's oldest compass brand. After I wrote this, I realized there's still a British military compass company. They still make the British marching compass. It's like almost a hobby at this point. It's still it's small scale. But so technically they outlast us by a few years. So I have to say that because this is false marketing right here. A little bit about the progression of the Brunton. Those of you who raised your hand and have used a Brunton before, I'm betting it was one of the older models. We phased out some of these older models, but the one up here on the left, this is the 1979. It's called the International model. And it did improve quite a bit about the functionality of a Brunton internationally. It had some other flaws, so it has been phased out. And I can come back to that thought here in a second. In 2003, this half hand-drawn patent drawing, this is of the Geo, which was really the first model change to the pocket transit since 1894. If you notice, the international model still looks pretty similar to what David Brunton drew up in 1894. The Geo, I do not know why the patent drawing is hand-drawn right here. The dial looks like a child drew it. Anyway, this had a kind of the first significant change to the model. Okay, so hold that thought. Just a little bit of background. As Cynthia said, I grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico, which is on the flanks of a huge volcanic center. And so it's kind of hard not to get into geology looking at that every day. I started going to gem and mineral shows, like using my allowance or whatever money I had. It's also hard to grow up in Los Alamos and not become a climber. And so I have been climbing since I was a teenager, and just even recreationally, just interacting with rocks pretty much constantly. So it was basically in my blood to become a geologist. I went to Wheaton College in Illinois, and this is really one of my main mentors, Jeff Greenberg, who I started college thinking, oh, I'll do pre-med. I don't know what I want to do. But after that first geology class and Jeff Greenberg hounding me to become a geology major, I caved, and here we are. Still friends with him to this day. I think this is the first picture of me with a Brunton. That's a super old Jacob staff. If any of you have measured sections with Jacob staffs, that's the classic 2x4 with a Brunton duct taped on top of it in the Black Hills. Really, my first experience working with Bruntons was one of frustration. It was really hard to figure out how to do certain measurements. And still, those early experiences, I think, shaped why I ended up inventing a new type of Brunton. That's me as a grad student in Taiwan, looking at cobbles. And then I worked for the Colorado Geological Survey. This is a fault trench in Colorado. Dug a big hole looking for a fault, but didn't find one where we thought we would, but found all sorts of other interesting archaeological stuff. Anyway, I use this metaphor, this saying, standing by the door. After my master's, I realized I didn't want to go too deep academically. I wanted to stay closer to being able to help usher others in and continue to do outreach and be an educator, rather than dive super deep into a very specific subdiscipline. And so my husband and I, my husband was also a teacher, we taught in various settings. This was in Switzerland. Shortly after we got married, getting to teach outdoor ed in Switzerland was pretty darn cool. That's me back in the Black Hills where I was a field camp student. I've taught for Wheaton there for various summers, and really just have enjoyed, really I had over a decade of getting to teach field geology all over the US West. In Durango, so where my husband and I ended up for about a decade, he was teaching high school physics and biology and chemistry and geology, especially at a project-based school. And I was teaching at Fort Lewis College. And as somewhat financially strapped educators in Colorado, and also as creatives, we were always looking for things we could do and make and make extra money on the side. So we started making and selling the teaching tools and gadgets that we used ourselves. So we literally started a garage business and sold water rocket launchers for physics teachers all around the world, actually. Geology field kits. These are groundwater models, kind of like an ant farm, but you can visualize food coloring in like groundwater patterns in these models. Colored pencils, I'll come back to that. Ways to visualize things geological, and Jacob staffs. That's going to be a repeated theme because I remember my frustration with the 2x4 on the mountain. We started making our own Jacob staffs in the garage. So yeah, we would get home, after teaching and climbing and like make random stuff in our garage for a few hours at night in Durango. And really were enjoying that, but it was a lot of work. I was teaching a lot of different geology and GIS, but my favorite thing to teach was field methods and field camp. So every summer, I'd spend time with Fort Lewis College students or Wheaton students, or even some other groups in New Mexico and Colorado, South Dakota, and just loved being out in the field with students, because it really is where you start to see these ideas get synthesized, kind of where students become geologists. So you can hardly see it in this picture, but this student, bless his heart, is using the Brunton very incorrectly. There's just a lot going on right here. He's trying to measure an overhanging surface with a book, but the book is not aligned with the bedding. I watched this so many times where students, even seniors in a geology program, couldn't explain what they were doing, or were measuring the wrong surface, or just measuring poorly. And part of it was because the Brunton model is kind of hard to use in certain situations. Overhang, certain measurements are just tough. Or sometimes you have to perch yourself on a cliff and again, use a book or something to mimic the surface that you're trying to measure. So again, the Brunton hadn't changed since 1894. Here's another one. Not sure what, I think he's preparing to measure, but I'm not sure what this student's doing. So I remember being at an outcrop in Durango, and I have a picture of the outcrop later on, but I'll go back to this to set the stage. I remember holding up a little spiral notebook against a bedding plane, which also had all sorts of slicken lines on it. It was a beautiful rock. And I was like, I wish my Brunton could measure just like this spiral notebook. And I could take what's called strike and dip of the plane, exactly how this spiral notebook is held against this rock. And then I mentally went through a lot of other things. Well, if it did that, then I could measure the lineations. And there was a laptop commercial where a laptop hinge did several different motions. And so I was thinking, okay, I would love for the Brunton to be able to twist and turn and take measurements exactly like my spiral notebook, hybridized with this laptop. So went back, we got busy with the fall semester, but the idea wouldn't leave me alone. This is back in 2013 or so. So Christmas break comes along, and my husband Dave says, well, I can help prototype this if I can buy a mill and learn how to machine metal in our garage. Okay, all right, that's fine. Let's try to make it work. So we turned what was already a pretty good garage into this machine shop. And by the time the winter was through, we had made 3 functional prototypes. I had one in my hand before I drove over here, but I opened it up and it's one we've already mined the innards out of. So I didn't bring a prototype. It's usually fun to show them off. But it actually did what I had envisioned. And I took these prototypes to field classes and field camps that summer. Now we're into 2014. And it really did help visualize and help students see what they were trying to measure. So we started down the patent process because we wanted to protect the idea, and got that filed kind of provisionally and then non-provisionally in 2014 and 2015. And that's one of the configurations that's pretty unique. And rather than try to build this in our garage, we're like, we can't compete with Brunton, nor can we make this in our garage, without changing or rapidly overhauling our teaching careers at that time. So we just approached Brunton with the idea. Said, okay, let's sign NDAs, let's meet. And so we took the idea to Brunton, and their headquarters at the time were in Boulder, Colorado, in terms of where that Phoenix, Swedish, North American headquarters were, and had this like Shark Tank moment. Realized that all of the people around the table who we were presenting the idea to, they didn't even know how to use the conventional Brunton. So it became a day-long session of us teaching Brunton leadership how to take geological measurements with the traditional models, and then showing them the benefits of our prototype so that we could have something to compare it to so they could understand. And so that meeting was also eye-opening and life-changing in that at that moment I realized, gosh, Brunton kind of needs some help. And so we worked alongside Brunton. We're still teaching at the time, full-time college and high school educators, working with Brunton up in Riverton. We would drive up from Durango, work with the engineers on creating what became the Brunton version of our model. And then it's like, there's no way I'm letting other people who don't understand this present this to the world. So we went to GSA, AGU, EGU. We went to multiple big geological events on our own dollar to help present this model to the geological community. And that's a picture of us with Hank Iden was the Brunton engineer here in the orange shirt. Hank was the Brunton engineer for a good 40 years. Really, really funny and intelligent man. He just wasn't a geologist. He had never actually taken it out in the field. So we've made sure we take our staff out in the field once a year so that everyone on the staff knows what they're making, like what the ultimate purpose is for what they're making. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip over this. This is an intro video that we've used. It's on YouTube. If you look up Brunton axis, this is probably the first video that'll pop up. And that's on one of the outcrops where the idea had popped into my head. It's actually a bouldering place in Durango, but I used it for geology exercises. So the model takes strike and dip simultaneously. It takes trend and plunge of alineation simultaneously. And it can measure bearing and vertical angle at the same time. And so there's actually a lot of applications beyond just geology that are starting to get appreciated. But there's a lot of really cool structural measurements that used to be pretty difficult that the axis can do really easily. And we're almost 10 years into this. It was released in 2016. So we're almost a decade into it being revealed to the world. And it's still amazing to go to geology events and have people walk up to the Brunton booth and say, "What's that?" And so we get to start all over and explain how it works. And so it's still pretty cool. And it's seen a lot of growth in Europe, where a lot of structural geologists take measurements slightly differently, but the axis can do that as well. Okay. So I think I said to someone in here, one thing led to another, and I'll try to explain that in my talk. So here we are. So educators turned inventors working alongside Brunton to help launch the axis. We did a lot, again, this is still on our own time and dollar, doing like webinars on how to use the axis. Got to go to Vienna for the first time for the EGU. That's a friend measuring. Our daughter was born during this process, and so she's measuring the baby bump with the axis right there. You can hardly see it. Great moments in axis history. So at this point, we're getting to know Brunton leadership in Sweden pretty well through all this interaction. Hank Iden, the engineer at Brunton, his health was starting to decline rapidly. And even though Dave is not an engineer by trade, he's a high school science teacher, he had taught himself SolidWorks and has always been a 3D thinker and can make and fix anything. So he was hired as the Brunton engineer to work alongside Hank and eventually replace Hank when he could no longer work. And so at this point, when our daughter was born, Dave was already working for Brunton, or he started right after her birth. And so Hannah's been along for a lot of random Brunton things that we do. She's like accidentally in the background of a lot of our marketing photos. But yeah, so she's been obviously a life-changing addition to our family. And just yesterday, she was at Brunton She's not making things yet, but soon we'll get her on the line helping to make things. She's 7 now. Okay, so this is Dave. Now he's at least an employee of Brunton. My maternity leave job was to run a Climbers Alliance in Lander and the Climbers Festival in Lander, but still helping with Brunton whenever I can. Early 2021, it's still COVID times. Most people are still working at home. Brunton was, because we make military compasses, Brunton stayed open throughout COVID. We didn't ever close down actually, and actually had really low COVID rates. But Dave was working at home, and I remember an early January 2021 call. All our meetings with Swedish ownership had to be super early in the morning because they're 8 hours ahead. So it's like a Monday morning, and I overhear the Brunton CEO in Sweden saying to Dave, "Hey Dave, what would you and Lauren think of buying Brunton?" So I stop what I was doing, like Hannah's taking a nap or something, and I eavesdrop on the stairs, like what is Per asking? Basically, the Swedish owner of Phoenix, the umbrella company, the parent company, realized that Brunton wasn't a high priority. I think they realized they couldn't manage it very well. And running a small manufacturing company in the middle of Wyoming was kind of difficult to do from Stockholm. And so he said that he would be willing to sell Brunton if the right people came along. And so the CEO said, "I think you guys are those people. Let's figure out how to do it." We were two educators. We didn't have the capital to just say, "Yeah, we'll buy Brunton." And so it took a lot of negotiating with Sweden, and creativity to figure out exactly how to do that. But by the time this GSA, this is the Portland, the second COVID GSA, we all had to wear masks. We were days away from buying the company. It was the most awkward year. So January through October, we had to keep the deal a secret. I got hired on as the sales manager. And I shouldn't put that in quotes. I was the sales manager, but all the time in the background from my hiring on, we were working on the deal and how to make this deal work. But we couldn't tell anyone in Riverton. I couldn't even tell my direct supervisor, the sales manager who was based in Boulder. I almost got fired a few times because I'd be late to things because I'm like dealing with lawyers and banks and all of that. So it was, and even at this GSA, we had to keep it a secret from the geological community. We had so wanted it to be able to be live by this time. But anyway, by November, the early November of 2021, it finally went through. The deal we arranged, kind of just reached a point where the purchase agreement was agreed upon by all. And so it was crazy and really exciting to have kind of that weird, secretive year finally work out. And so really that began the phase of what we're in now, and still will probably always be in, is really it's the hard work now. We have to, we're continuing to work on Brunton's identity in Wyoming. I think as geologists, we perhaps recognize Brunton differently than a lot of Wyoming had. Brunton had done a lot of other products and became known for its binocular line and hunting optics in Wyoming. And when that went away about 10 years ago, most people in Riverton and Wyoming thought that Brunton went under. So we're still getting this, "Oh, Brunton, I thought that went under." Or, "Oh, can you fix my binoculars?" Like most people still think that we're a binocular company. But we kept everyone in Riverton. The whole production staff stayed on with us and was super psyched to have local owners that they knew instead of people they had never met in Sweden. We rebuilt the management team in Riverton. No one lost their jobs over the transition. Everyone with the other companies just stayed down in Colorado or Sweden. Now we're at about 30 people, and it's still a mission and a priority to let Wyoming know that, hey, Brunton is still here. We make compasses. And that's another view of the building where we are, that hopefully you'll come visit us at some point.
Don't worry about that.
Oh, okay. There's a lot on our website you can visit. I'm going to speed up a little bit for the sake of time. Just a few shots of our production team. Some of you can see Michelle making transits down here, but we do make all of our plastic compasses are assembled in-house and printed in-house. Even some of the plastics, I would say over half of our plastic parts and pieces are also injection molded just down the street in Riverton. So there's actually a growing feedback loop of manufacturing in Riverton, and we kind of feed off of each other. There's another electronics company down the street that we're starting to work with as well. Few quick stats. As of this year, 100% of our compasses are made in Riverton. We make almost 100,000 compasses per year, but that's not transits. Transits, we're still at about 7,000 to 8,000, sometimes 9,000 per year. We do a lot of international sales. We export a ton, especially where mining is big. And most of our supply chain is domestic, but discussions of tariffs and reciprocal tariffs scare us. Even though we're a US manufacturer, stuff has to come from somewhere, and we have to sell, reciprocal tariffs would really hit our international exports pretty hard. That's probably too small to see. That's just showing geology. This is a snapshot of average revenue really over the last decade. The geology transits are always well over half of our revenue, with recreation, military, and other random stuff in there as well. So we're really kind of a three-part company, and we're mostly talking about the geology, but I have samples up here. We make recreational compasses, and we do a lot of military compass work as well. Last year, celebrated our 130th year as a brand. You guys ever heard of Gefeller? So yeah, we also started working with Gefeller. Now all of our transits come in a Gefeller case, so it's a significant step up in quality. And they've come to a few events with us. They're based in Idaho. So that was an exciting partnership last year that began last year. We've started working with different ways of illuminating compasses. This is largely driven by the military, but we made a geology model that we called the Miner's Delight. It's a ghost town in South Pass. But you can now see your transit if you're mapping underground or mapping in Iceland in the winter for some reason. It's great in the dark. We added colors. A lot of people laugh, but this is actually functional. Bruntons used to be dirt colored, and you would set down your super expensive Brunton on a rock or in the dirt and never find it again. And so we've made an assemblage of fun colors that eventually will stop. We have one more color we want to make. But yeah, it's pretty cool to see these lined up. We make these in batches. And when you see 50 Bruntons lined up being made, I can't walk by without taking a picture. So I have a sample of this up here. If anyone served in the military, you might have used a lensatic compass. This is a new model for Brunton. We're trying to become the main compass company in the US. We already are, but the majority soldier's compass is made by another company, Kamanga in Michigan. So we just came out with our first official tritium-powered, tritium-illuminated lensatic compass to compete with them. It just launched. I think we're already out of stock, but we just launched this week or last week. And working with tritium is kind of our second illumination method. The previous ones I showed you were a battery-powered EL panel, but these, so dark in here, we could mess with the tritium model. But it's radioactive. Its half-life is 12 years, so it stays illuminated for really 24 years. But that's an exciting development for us. I threw this in here. This happened very recently. This was a March news event, just getting named as the Wyoming Small Business Person of the Year. Really, it should be Dave and I both, but I got to go to DC and meet with SBA people that said things. It wasn't as much of a listening session as I had hoped. Got to shake hands with Governor Gordon. So that was a nice honor. About 10 minutes to go. I want to honor time. I added this section because I know there's really only half of you all have perhaps used Bruntons. This also is a way of showing how our invention is different from the standard models without taking you all outside on a field trip. So bear with me a little bit longer for a little bit of a geometry and field geology lesson or review. Back to this picture. No, that's not the best example. Let's just use this. So why do geologists use Bruntons? It is a good tool to measure the geometry of rock in the field. And that becomes data that we put on maps or use in models to figure out what's under the surface or what pressures were exerted on mountain belts to make them grow, to understand hazards. So we measure and collect data whenever we see a meaningful plane or a line. And we also take note of what other characteristics of that rock. When we talk about planar measurements, like this bedding plane, this dark gray, pretend this is a layer of rock in my lovely illustration here. When we talk about strike and dip, the horizontal reference plane is really important. And so I'm going to use the term strike and dip. Strike is the line of intersection, kind of like a shoreline, because water is always horizontal. So your line of strike is that horizontal line where the horizontal plane intersects your bedding plane or whatever plane you're trying to measure. And then your dip angle is the angle of steepness. So 0 dip is horizontal, 90-degree dip is vertical. And we use strike and dip in the US. In Europe, they prefer dip direction and dip azimuth, but it's basically just a similar principle. Again, it's really important quantitative data that goes into models and maps. So with a traditional transit, including the new purple one that came out this year, when you measure strike, you just hold the transit along the bedding plane. And sometimes you hold it on a book or a clipboard, hopefully not one full of metal, to help level the surface out. So these two pictures are of a traditional measurement of strike. Then you have to pick up, usually you want to write that down unless you have a really good memory. You write down your strike measurement. Then you pick up the transit and move it 90 degrees and you measure dip. That's the dip angle measurement along the steepest part of a plane. And then a good rule is to also take note of the dip direction. So really there's 3 things you have to take note of and use your Brunton for a planar measurement: strike, dip, and dip direction. The geo with that bad patent drawing from 2003, the geo can take dip and dip direction simultaneously. So the Europeans love this model and sort of the new structural geology wave of folks who prefer that. It makes some sense. It also can take strike and dip like the other models. So the geo is a great model. It's kind of a hybrid between the two. But the geo has some limitations. The hinge stops rotating after a certain point. So the axis, our invention, takes away some features of the Brunton, but by reconfiguring it, it can take strike and dip of a plane simultaneously. So you don't have to move the transit. You take one measurement, and it's locked into the compass the way the needle works. So you can move it away, look at it, and write your measurements down. You don't have to move it in several configurations. It also is a great teaching tool because these top two, like this, if you think back to that diagram, this shows your horizontal plane. Your line of strike is through the hollow hinge, and your dip angle is shown by the instrument itself. So from a teaching standpoint, it's great for students who just aren't getting it. Well, any student really, but like it shows that measurement configuration. It's also great for standing back from the plane if you know you're along strike and taking the measurement from a distance. That's actually your most accurate measurement right there, because you don't have the uneven surface of a rock. Okay, that was a super quick lesson on strike and dip. Lineations, lines on rock surfaces, are measured with a vertical reference plane in mind. And so we talk about trend and plunge. Trend is the compass bearing. It's the plunge direction. And plunge is how steeply plunging that line is. So again, we're talking about lines. If you visualize your finger or a pen, 0 plunge is something that's horizontal, 90 plunge is vertical. So with Bruntons, I had to search. I don't have good pictures and I need to get out there and get them. It's super difficult to get accurate trend and plunge with a conventional Brunton. You have to really know what you're doing. Usually this is just eyeballed, but it ends up that you have to hold up a notebook or a clipboard perfectly vertically to become the vertical plane. And then you get your direction. And then you move the compass to get your angle, your plunge angle. The geo, again, it's limited by its hinge. It doesn't rotate fully, but it can take some simultaneous trend and plunge. But the axis, and once I stop talking and we turn on the lights, those of you who want to come fiddle with Bruntons, I have 2 axes up here. It swivels around a secondary axis, that's why we called it that, so that the lid can become the vertical plane. This is the rock where the invention happened, actually. There it is. That's it. I still go visit it anytime I'm in Durango. I like to touch it and say hi. But it swivels so that the lid becomes the vertical plane, the compass stays horizontal, and you have in one measurement, what you can't see well is that the lid has a protractor on it, so you're getting a simultaneous measurement of trend and plunge. Even on overhangs, which is super tricky with a conventional Brunton. And then the hinge has all sorts of, it can measure more complicated things like fold geometries really well because of that hinge configuration. Other things that Bruntons measure. Here's our 3rd Jacob staff. It comes back 3 times in this presentation. That's Dave modeling the Jacob staff. But Brunton has had this like trekking pole for the longest time. And when I saw that, I said, can we please add centimeter markings on it and make that a Jacob staff? So now we have a really lightweight trekking pole that you can compress and put in your backpack or use it as a trekking pole. and you stick your Brunton on top of it, and it's a very affordable and lightweight and strong Jacob staff. What he's doing is measuring stratigraphic thickness. So Bruntons are used for that as well. So to tie all this together and bring it to Wyoming, and then I'll stop pretty soon. Bruntons are used to take measurements largely to become data points on geological maps. And so we take those strike and dip or trend and plunge measurements, combine them with observations of rock type, and those can kind of the first step with a lot of understanding of an area is to make a geologic map. And so students in any good field program are still making paper maps by hand because they have to understand how to do it and draw those contacts by hand and color in the geological units with colored pencils that hopefully mean something. We used to sell little kits that had the actual geology colors. The colors indicate age, and it's almost universal. Like a geologist can look at these colors in Israel and say, oh, I know exactly what that map means. It's the same in Taiwan, same anywhere. Each color is kind of indicative of an age. So anyway, this is an exercise I used to do in Colorado, but I used it because you can see each of these symbols. The line, this is a strike line, and they're oriented based on that compass direction of strike. And then dip direction is indicated by these little tick marks, and the dip angle is the number. So if you zoom into any kind of detailed geologic map, you'll see these symbols all over the place. That's like the foundational data of a geologist. The color is the rock type. These over here are symbols of metamorphic foliation. So rather than bedding of sedimentary layers, it's the arrangement of minerals in metamorphic units. So when you really zoom into a good geologic map, all of the symbols you see were measured by a Brunton. And in this student exercise, I cut out the square mile in the middle or quarter mile, and that's what they had to figure out on their own. So kind of bringing it home, literally, if you look at most geologic maps, especially in this area, if it has anything to do with Tetons, you'll see J.D. Love at the bottom. David Love was one of, if not the most famous Wyoming geologists ever. He mapped, he created basically the map of the entire state, basically twice. He especially focused on the Tetons. He helped map critical minerals during World War II, and which led to discovering some gas hills deposits of uranium. He worked all over various industries and also was a big conservationist and really advocated for, despite, and probably because of understanding what resource extraction does to certain areas, became an advocate for certain areas to stay off limits. And if you get nothing else out of this presentation other than this statement, make sure you've read Rising from the Plains. If you have not read this, as a Wyoming person who showed up to this presentation and is part of this group, you must go home and read this. It's fantastic, and it features, it's John McPhee hanging out with Dave Love. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2006. I never got to meet the man. This is one of his maps. This is the, I think the 85 map of Wyoming. Grand Teton National Park. This one, if you have and can zoom in, you'll see his measurements all over the place. Maps lead to structural interpretations. It's not just the surface, it's trying to understand what's under the surface, whether that's purely from a scientific standpoint or resource understanding or hazards such as earthquakes or landslides. This is the Moose Quadrangle. So that's Blacktail Butte. I was just trying to find something regional and local that showed some symbols. And this is, again, also a David Love map, now digital. But you can see probably measurements done by Dave Love with his Brunton. Geologic maps are beautiful. I could do a whole presentation on them, but I'll stop there. Final few tidbits. The state geologist, well, the Wyoming State Geological Survey has a wonderful website. If you haven't spent much time on it lately, they've done a lot of great work and continue to do that. Erin Campbell, the state geologist, I had to throw this picture in. It's kind of small, but there's her out in the field with her Brunton on her belt. They always come in a little leather case, so you can spot a geologist if they wear their Brunton to the bar at night or any, like some people truly just, it's a form of identity. They keep it on them. This is tiny, but also from the State Geo Survey. I wanted to show an example of, these are all interactive maps. So you can go to the State Survey website and explore all of these interactive maps, all of which used Bruntons for the data collection and the structural data measurements. Each of these is just a wealth of information. A map is worth shelves and shelves of written material. And I'd seen this article as well, another geologist with the Brunton on his belt. Geological mapping and geological field work are not done. It'll never be done. It's an ongoing effort. I think the more we map, the more we realize we don't understand everything, and it forms more questions than it often answers. Just another, this is one example. This is that the interactive mineral resources map. And I think that's, oh, and there's the hazards map. And that is it. We can, I don't know if there's any questions in there. We can also turn on the lights and I can show off some of the Bruntons.
No questions coming through on Zoom yet.
Okay. Any questions out there? Yeah.
I'm curious, what do you hope the future of Brunton is?
Good question. We get that a lot in the kind of slightly reworded, like, oh, do people still use compasses? They come up to our booth with that opener. So several thoughts there. Maybe I'm blinded a little bit by our hopes for the company, but I actually really strongly believe that Brunton's going to be around for another 100 years, if not longer. We do have electronic gadgets. We have the ability to take most of the measurements I just talked about with a phone or an iPad. We can go backpacking with our phones and kind of know where we are. But I'm, again, hopeful, but also pretty confident that geology, outdoor recreation, and military will always recognize the need and need analog compasses that don't run out of batteries. And unless Earth's magnetic field goes haywire, they're still going to work. Whole separate topic I could talk for an hour on, but humanity also loses a lot if we don't retain the ability to know where we are on a map and find ourselves on maps instead of just being told where the blue dot. Just whenever I go backpacking and I'm in new terrain, I can't stand looking at a screen because I want the context of a map in front of me. and figuring out where I am on that map and the scale of that. And so I think, yeah, humanity will lose a lot if we don't retain that ability to find ourselves without a digital thing in front of us. So
Second question, on your axis, is it, I didn't see the pointer and the mirror per se.
yep.
I just wondered, it's still,
Oh, yeah.
it's still fully capable to position yourself on that.
So you're right. So the question was on the axis, and the earlier question was, what are your hopes for the company? I don't know if I fully answered that, but the axis does not have a mirror and it doesn't have a sighting arm. You can still, it has a hollow hinge. And so the idea, and one of the changes that you won't see unless you're up here, is that on all the other models, north is aligned with the sighting arm. So if you're trying to just find a bearing, you can do it like that or like that. North is aligned here. But on the axis, north is up here in terms of that zero, the zero reference point. And that allows you to look through the compass hinge and you get your bearing by just looking at the compass model. Yeah, you just sight through it.
So,
Yeah. We've thought about adding a mirror back though, as a safety thing, and so you can put your contacts in the field and all that good stuff. Yes.
During the period around World War II, did Brunton manufacture a bunch of compasses for them?
Mhm.
I think we have one.
Yep. Yeah, it's basically a green one. And yeah, that's what,
Except it's olive drab.
yeah, it's kind of, it's various versions of green, olive drab. Brunton started working really in World War I on just basically modified that. It's still used. This is still more precise than a tool for aligning mortars. And so this is an artillery tool. So artillery teams use it to get a precise bearing and angle in the field. So
is that what the guy was doing? You, with the green one and the military guy?
yep.
So he was kind of scoping in the northern show.
Yeah, and they also stick them on stakes in line and realign it. It's kind of an interesting process to watch, and Dave got to see it live. I still want to go see a mortar shoot, but yeah, they like align these stakes in the field, double check, realign, and then it's once they hit their target, they're good to go. Yeah. So yeah, that's one thing I didn't realize about. I think a lot of geologists don't realize that about Brunton, that, oh, it's used for other purposes. Yes. So what happened to Brunton optics? During one of those changes on the handy dandy timeline, when one of the Scandinavian companies bought out Brunton from another one, they switched back to a former CEO who wanted nothing to do with the previous CEO's product line. So he scrapped the optics line, and it basically, it coincided with Brunton moving all the management down to Colorado. So the optics guys were like, we don't want to move to Colorado. We're staying here with the optics line. So it became Maven, which is Maven Optics in Lander, Lucid Optics in Riverton, and I think that's basically it.
So there's a related question on Zoom, which is any interested in getting back into the field glass business?
We're really good friends with the Maven guys. We have a handshake agreement not to. The optics were never made in Riverton. They're not, it's hard to make good optics even here in the US. And so it kind of, at this point, would feel a little bit of a tangent for us, because we're we're really priding ourselves and seeing a lot of momentum, obviously now too, about US manufacturing, US made, everything's here. Again, I think there's misconceptions about that because it's hard to suddenly pivot your supply chain if you're getting parts and pieces from other places. But yeah, that probably not. We still have a few little monoculars that we don't make in-house. They are imported, but they still feel like part of the product line because they're great little tools for outdoor rec and geology. But that's the only, they're just very simple monoculars.
Bye, Mike. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
What, 130 years?
Yep.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maintaining that business and keeping it in Wyoming.
Mhm.
Bravo.
Yep.
Particular question is, does Brunton, from a consumer advocate point of view, are you thinking about, these are highly sophisticated tools that, and I think a lot of the people here are engineers, geologists, and they understand how it works. What about educating the younger?
Yes. We have, and I didn't pull all of them out. We have a whole line of faceplate compasses and even sort of a training, this is called the GeoLite. It's like the under $100 version of a transit that students can use because they can see the tiny print. So we have instructor kits. We're working on videos. Like our current wave, when we get through finishing the launch of that, if nothing new is in the pipeline, we're going to pause and really catch up on the educational resources that go with our stuff.
Seems like the perfect dovetail
yeah.
for you and your husband.
Yeah.
Being educators.
Yeah.
And bringing that up and being a real leader in education through the manufacturing of Brunton.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's the exciting, fun stuff I can't wait to get to. And we do a lot with scouting groups. We're working on partnerships with Boy Scouts, Scouting America, Girl Scouts, Knowles, eventually Outward Bound. And so, yeah, there's a lot that fell by the wayside. Brunton was once more active with a lot of them, but lost it over the decades. So we're trying to bring that back.
As a new entrepreneur, from an education standpoint, being an educator into an entrepreneur, I mean, it seems like the perfect dovetail. And I encourage you to try to marry those as much as you can.
Yeah, no, I agree. Looking forward to it.
Well, should we have people come up and?
And feel free to keep asking questions. We can mingle over the table of random Bruntons.
So before we, Lauren, I just want to say thank you again for,
thank you.
for coming up
You're very welcome.
here, and let's stand behind here for the Zoom folks. So just some gifts to show our appreciation.
Thank you. Well, my pleasure. It's fun.
Again, thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, you folks on Zoom, that you can't come and play with the toys here, but maybe you have one at home.
Yes.